WDET is supported by the College of Business Administration at University of Detroit Mercy. UDM's Master of Business Administration is designed to accommodate the career needs of professionals across a variety of work organizations. More information at business.udmercy.edu.
It's the Metro on 101.9 WDET. I'm Nick Austin.
I'm Tia Graham. Today on the program, we'll look at recent Supreme Court decisions, including a deeper look at the decision on homelessness, along with learning about two groups working to promote access to books and reading.
That's right, Tia. On Monday, the Supreme Court wrapped up its term with a slew of important decisions, with cases declaring presidents like former President Donald Trump having absolute immunity for official acts while in office. The term also had decisions on access to the abortion pill mifepristone, which was upheld, as well as a ruling allowing local governments to fine or jail the homeless for sleeping outside. In fact, that last case was so alarming, as you mentioned, for the unhoused, that we're going to talk to Father Tim of the Pope Francis Center to get his take on what occurred, as well as the concerns of the community a little bit later this hour. But first, we want to analyze some of these decisions from the Supreme Court and recap its term. To do so, we're joined by University of Michigan law professor and former U.S. Attorney Barbara McQuade, who is also a co-host for the Sisters-in-Law podcast. Barb, welcome back to the Metro.
Oh, thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, well, so many cases. Before we get into the specifics, I just want to make sure we all have a good background here. You don't have to get into Marbury versus Madison or any first-year law school stuff, but what role would you say the Supreme Court plays and has historically played in our justice system?
Well, their role is really supposed to be to interpret the law. You know, the legislature makes the laws, the executive branch, the president and others execute the laws, and then when there are questions, it's the courts who decide the laws. But sometimes there are accusations that the court overreaches and engages in what's referred to as legislating from the bench and interpreting laws not as they are, but as they wish they would be. And so that's sometimes where some of the controversy comes into play.
We have had people who are really concerned about one of the most recent cases, including our own President Biden, who had this to say about the case arising out of former President Donald Trump's claim that he should be immune from prosecution for acts he committed while president.
This nation was founded on the principle that there are no kings in America. Each of us is equal before the law. No one is above the law, not even the President of the United States. With today's Supreme Court decision on presidential immunity, that fundamentally changed. For all practical purposes, today's decision almost certainly means that there are virtually no limits on what a president can do.
Do you agree with President Biden's take, and how would you assess what occurred in this decision?
Well, I do agree with President Biden that this is really a seismic change in our understanding of the laws that pertain to the president. You know, I think throughout history we've assumed that Richard Nixon was subject to criminal prosecution, or members of the Reagan administration, Ronald Reagan and Iran-Contra and other kinds of things. So it does seem different, but I will disagree with the idea that a president cannot be held accountable. There is still accountability, though it may exist more in theory than in practice, and that is in terms of impeachment. So a president who, in his official capacity, violates the law cannot now be criminally prosecuted, which seems to me a very substantial change in our understanding. But that president could still be impeached and removed from office for engaging in a high crime or misdemeanor. Now, in recent years, we have seen that, because conviction by the Senate requires a 2/3 vote of the Senate, our incredible polarization seems to make that unlikely that senators would convict someone of their own party. But I hope that's not the case.
Yeah, it would be tougher to get over that threshold. You mentioned the 60 votes necessary in the Senate, but that goes to the mechanisms we would have to hold a president accountable. One of the key terms in that decision I hear is official acts, which I think we don't necessarily know. What does that matter? For example, former President Trump once said that he could get away with as much as shooting a person in New York. Now, that was outside of the context of being president, but he was just talking about his own power. Of course, you mentioned Richard Nixon. We have the Frost-Nixon interviews where Richard Nixon said, if the president does it, it's not illegal. So official acts versus unofficial acts. What do we know from this decision and what's going to be next in terms of making that determination?
Well, what Chief Justice Roberts says in the majority opinion is this doesn't hold the president above the law. The president is still subject to all the same laws as every other citizen, which is committed outside of their official duties as president. Since no one else is president, it's really like we're all the same. And so I think if he were to shoot someone on Fifth Avenue, we would say that's outside of his official duties.
Also a state case.
There you go. Could be prosecuted for that. But it gets complicated because they said a couple of things. One is that prosecutors may not look at motive of a president, and so that makes it a little trickier, and that prosecutors may not use as evidence anything the president said or did in his official capacity. And so that can be like prosecuting a case with an arm tied behind your back. So I think it's still fair game to prosecute someone for shooting someone on Fifth Avenue or doing anything wholly outside of their role as president, which is why I think in the Trump case, we are going to still see prosecution of this case for things like organizing false slates of electors and pressuring state officials to change the outcome of the election in their states. Those were not official acts. But I think there will be some disagreement as to where the official line ends and where the unofficial line begins. And so I imagine we will see a great deal of litigation to decide that question.
Yeah, this term, the court also overturned the Chevron doctrine, which had been in place for the past 40 years, basically providing federal agencies and the executive branch, government experts, they're allowed a reasonable interpretation of ambiguous laws. If they get a law from Congress, they're allowed to interpret it, and the courts aren't supposed to really question that unless they're getting really outside the bounds, as I understand it. Can you tell us a bit about this decision and why the court made it and why you believe it's important, if at all?
Yeah, your interpretation is accurate, but the reason it matters is that we have always deferred to experts in agencies. So if it's an EPA regulation, we assume that the people who work for the EPA are scientists and climate specialists who are in the best position to make a decision. Or if it relates to workplace safety, we've got people who understand the dangers of fumes or buzzsaws in factories. And so the statutes that are passed by the legislature are quite broad, but they delegate authority to these executive agencies to make rules, regulations. And what we've said before is that we're going to defer to their interpretation unless they're unreasonable. And so I see this as part of this effort by some to dismantle what they refer to as the administrative state, those who believe that there's too much power that is given to what they refer to as unelected bureaucrats in government. Of course, unelected bureaucrats have been appointed by elected executive branch officials, selected based on their expertise. And I think the case was really aptly summed up because now it's courts who are going to interpret those rules. Just the day before, Justice Neil Gorsuch had confused nitrous oxide with, which is laughing gas, with a toxic pollutant that was being emitted by a factory. And so it demonstrated, I think, in very stark terms, why judges are not better experts than the career professionals who do have that expertise. So I think there's a little worry there that this is a power grab by the courts. In fact, Justice Elena Kagan accused the majority of appointing themselves the administrative czar.
Yeah, that would run counter to what you said the role of the court was at the beginning of this conversation, as again, we're joined by former U.S. Attorney and current Michigan law professor Barbara McQuade. Moving into another case that has some folks here concerned, including, like I said, we're going to be speaking with Father Tim of Pope Francis Shelter. It's this case that came out of City of Grants Pass versus Johnson, where the court ruled it was not cruel and unusual punishment to criminalize the homeless for sleeping outside when they lack shelter. What was the reasoning of the 6-3 majority in this case, and how would you analyze this decision against our previous understanding surrounding situations like this?
Yeah, so this is a very significant decision. Of course, homelessness is a significant problem. But the problem with this case is, according to the dissenters, is the court has really essentially criminalized sleeping or breathing because people who don't have any other place to go can now be charged with a crime for simply existing outside overnight. There were some allegations that the statute was overly broad because it could apply not only to people who are sleeping and who are homeless, but also people who are camped out on a blanket watching fireworks, or even a parent holding a baby in a blanket, because it prohibits sleeping outside. I imagine we will rely on the good faith of prosecutors to avoid prosecuting some of those people. But I think this is a real crossroads for our country about how we treat homeless people. Is it cruel and unusual punishment to punish people for doing something that over which they really have no control? This is the decision of the court, but I think it's really going to raise the stakes and call for the state to now deliver the kinds of resources that have long been necessary to house unhoused people, to provide an alternative to sleeping under an overpass.
Yeah, we're going to speak about that a little bit later in our next conversation, by the way, so make sure to keep it locked right here as we continue with that story. But cycling back to you, Barb, I'm thinking about all these decisions, the role of the court. One check on power you're going to learn in law schools, this idea of stare decisis, the idea that courts should follow precedent rulings from previous decisions and make rules or make decisions on the narrowest grounds possible. Yet I think folks are seeing with sweeping decisions like Dobbs overturning women's right to choose a couple of years ago, as well as some of these cases we've talked about, feels like the Roberts Court's not adhering to these principles to many. So for you, what checks do you believe are in place to ensure the court doesn't exceed its constitutional authority? Or what should we be looking at to make sure people have faith in the rule of law?
No, I agree with you. I think that one concern I have here is that the court is engaging in overreach. I've written this book on disinformation, and one of the concerns I address there is the harm it has on democracy. An important feature of democracy is forbearance. That is, just because you can use power doesn't mean you should use power. And in addition to the things you said, which is stare decisis, respect for precedents that have come before, this court has overturned a number of precedents and using not adhering to the normal reasons that precedent should be overturned, which is a new understanding of the facts and law, or the rule has proven unworkable in practice, or it is inconsistent with other laws that have come up since then, or people have not relied on the rule in their ordinary lives. They're kind of jettisoning that rule and just saying, well, it was egregiously wrong when it was decided, so we're going to overturn it. That's what they did in the Dobbs case, and now they've overturned other precedent like Chevron and other things that you have mentioned. And so I worry that power overreach could really undermine the legitimacy of the courts. And then one other thing besides overturning precedent to keep in mind, remember that the court chooses its cases. They get petitions to come before the court in thousands of cases every year. They choose about 60 that they're actually going to handle. So they've chosen to take these cases to give them an opportunity to overturn precedent. And so, I would argue that this is some deliberate flex of their power. And what is the check? I think the check is to elect a president whom you trust, to choose justices who will stay in their lane.
All right, we're going to have to end it there. But Barb McQuade, as you mentioned, author of Attack from Within, How Disinformation is Sabotaging America, which I enjoyed reading, so thank you there, as well as the University of Michigan law professor, former U.S. attorney. What don't you do? Professor McQuade, thank you for joining us on the Metro.
Thanks for having me.
Metro on 1019 WDET-FM. And as you just heard from Nick Austin, we're going to continue the conversation a little bit about the United States Supreme Court ruling on homelessness with the Pope Francis Center and Father Tim McCabe. You all stay right there.
It's the Metro on 101.9 WDET, and as we've been discussing, a slew of decisions from the U.S. Supreme Court, including one that's really touching some people right here, Tia.
Indeed. And late last week, as you just heard from Nick Austin and Barbara McQuade, a little bit earlier, the United States Supreme Court ruled that cities can ban homeless people from sleeping outside and in public. The Pope Francis Center, a nonprofit dedicated to helping the homeless population in Detroit, sent out a press release in response. The center recently opened their new Bridge housing campus that allows homeless individuals to stay for free while they look for permanent residency. A couple of weeks ago, we had Father Tim McCabe, the president and CEO of the Pope Francis Center, on the show to talk about the new campus and the mission to end homelessness. And actually, Father Tim McCabe brought this up to our attention. He said, hey, we see a ruling that's coming down soon. Would love to come back and talk about what that would mean if we do see it actually come through. And it did. So, Father Tim, thanks for joining the show and talking a little bit more about the Supreme Court ruling and some of the issues that we see with this and solutions we can put into place. Welcome back.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And you've been following this news, like I said, for a while. Now that we have the ruling, what are your thoughts?
Well, it was really disappointing, obviously, from a position of the homeless and to criminalize basic human functions like sleeping. It seems to be like some of the justices named. It's like criminalizing breathing. I mean, people need a place to sleep, and if they don't have any place to go, we're just exacerbating a very difficult situation for a lot of people. So, you impose a $200 or $300 fine on a person, or arrest them for sleeping in public. They now have a criminal record on top of a fine, on top of, while they're already down and dealing with some pretty hard situations. So it's a disappointing. It's not a solution by any means. It's, at best, it's going to push people out of one community into another community. And, we're starting to see a little bit of that here in Detroit, where we're seeing people being pushed out of other communities and ending up in Detroit looking for services. So it's not at all a solution, and it's not really getting at the real core issues of what homelessness is and where the solutions lie.
And thinking about the core issues, I think, homelessness looks different from person to person. It looks different from place to place. So why is it so important to factor that into the conversation when we talk about the ruling? And then just like you said, the importance there of just trying to get to the root problem.
Yeah, so from my research and from my working with the folks that are experiencing homelessness in Detroit, trauma is underneath all of it. So having a trauma-informed care approach is the most successful model in actually helping people regain some of their agency and actually getting in housing and being successfully housed. So that is such an important thing. But rather than criminalizing them, we need to address the root issues that they're dealing with. That's really presenting itself as mental illness, as addiction in a lot of cases. Now, I get that, that there's a real humanitarian crisis on the West Coast with the numbers of people who are on the streets and what that's doing to communities in terms of, human beings living outdoors and, defecating outdoors and in public areas. I mean, nobody wants to see that happening, but, we have got to begin to talk about affordable housing at the very basic level. Like if there is, the solution to homelessness is housing, that's just kind of at a very basic level. And right now we're talking about affordable housing being at something like 60% of AMI or even 30%, which is still way out of range for people who have no means.
We're chatting right now live with Father Tim McCabe, the president and CEO of the Pope Francis Center. And I love that you brought up the West Coast, because I know a lot of this was, because of what we're seeing happening on the West Coast, one of the highest populations in California. Actually, California has the highest population of homeless people right now. So California Governor Gavin Newsom stated that it was a way for cities to clear unsafe encampments, or a way to to create safe spaces. So if there are positives to this, if there's anything that's good to take away from it, what would there be?
From this ruling?
Yes.
I don't see any positives.
Okay.
I mean, it's to what end? You criminalize them, you move them out of a public area to where? If there isn't any housing, if there's no shelter beds available, then what happens? You just have pushed them out of an area, you've given them a fine, you've given them a criminal record, and now their problems are compounded.
And I think about this particular area we're in right now, Cass Corridor, now known Midtown. It was known to be a place that housed or was a home to a lot of people who unfortunately did not have homes. So they would find encampments or they would live in different spaces and areas. And we think about the pushing out and different things, and we've seen it clearly here. So when we see things like this happening, coupled with the ruling of the Supreme Court, what is at stake here?
Well, human lives are at stake. And the bottom line is that people are literally dying on our streets, and I'm doing way too many funerals for folks that are dying unnecessarily as a result of homelessness, whether through violence or through freezing to death. There are multiple, the life expectancy of somebody that's experiencing homelessness is radically lower than other people. So that's what's at stake here is literally human lives.
And just staying here with the city of Detroit, we're seeing, and just in the country, but in general in the city of Detroit, we're seeing rents going up. People are losing their homes, just all the things that are happening that are compounding onto families and individuals that are pushing them to extreme measures over to homelessness. So when we think about families who are already in these extreme pressures, what type of pressure will this put on the families as they hear this ruling come down?
Yeah, I'm sure it's anxiety producing, and the struggles, the fear of what this will mean for folks. I remember even during the beginning of the pandemic, people were, when we were to shelter in place, the folks that experienced homelessness were really afraid at that point. They're like, what does that mean? We don't have a home. Are they, they're going to impose martial law? Are they going to come and pick us up? So when hearing rulings like this, especially for, like you said, people who live on that razor's edge, they are one paycheck away from homelessness, and the number of evictions since the moratorium was lifted last year is skyrocketing. So that is really problematic, and the numbers are increasing as a result of that.
And just thinking about the Pope Francis Center, the New Bridge housing campus, this was, it's one step forward for those who are home housing insecure or homeless. In what ways do you hope this campus helps reduce, number one, homelessness, of course, because you're providing housing, but it helps kind of combat some of the things that we may see happening across the country with this ruling? Yeah,
this is a really an approach that has, come about as years of research that we've done from across the country about best practices, and we've put them all into one building. So the design of the building is really, every detail is about being successful in helping people make that transition. It's a trauma-informed approach, so that we're making sure that we're helping them heal from the conditions or the situations that have created the homelessness, and then helping them regain their sense of self and working with them through the process, through the system, to find adequate housing. So we believe that this approach, and the building itself, all the things that we're going to have, we'll have a medical clinic right on our campus. We're going to have the gymnasium, classrooms. We'll be able to do job readiness training, things like that in our kitchens, and we're going to do everything we can to kind of maximize people's sense of self and get them into a place of self-sufficiency in housing.
And when we can keep referring to trauma-informed approach, what type of wraparound services are we talking about with that approach?
Yeah, so psychiatry, social work, addiction specialists, housing specialists, group therapy, along with fun, stuff like art therapy and different activities kind of build community. One of the things that is really missing among the homeless population is family and community, and so we become that to them and for them. And then a strong aftercare program, recognizing that addiction and mental illness are not a straight line. We have relapses, you have setbacks, and so we want to be there with them if they experience that we can help them get back out on the right path.
And since the Supreme Court ruling, I know you all work with other organizations and different groups across the city. Have you heard from other groups and what are their ideas as well in terms of coming together to try to beef up support for the homeless population here?
Yeah, we do enjoy a really strong support from the mayor's office and from city council. And so I'm not concerned that they were going to start to criminalize homelessness in our city, but we do run the risk of other cities in the metropolitan area doing that and then pushing those folks into our communities.
Yeah. So, okay. Yeah. So if we do start to see that in a large push, what are some of the things that we can see happening from other social groups, including the Pope Francis Center, to help support that? What would you say to the city and city council in order to help support?
Yeah. Right now we have a shortage of shelter beds. We don't have enough beds in shelters for people who are in need of them. So that's something we're really working with the mayor's office on, making sure that there's enough, and then we have to come up with solutions like that and then continue to streamline the process. The process takes way too long. It can be a year or longer before people, once they get into the system, actually get their keys to a place.
And my last question before I let you go, because there are individuals in our communities, in our societies, in our area, in our region who aren't comfortable with maybe being around or in spaces where there are large populations of homeless people. So what would you say to those who are living in communities, ways to start to change the mindset of people?
Well, recognizing that the folks that are housing insecure or experiencing homelessness, they don't like it either. They're struggling as much as anybody with the idea. And there's a lot of shame around it. There's a lot of even trauma among those experiencing homelessness, just being homeless and the treatment that they experience on the streets from other people. So, seeing human beings, seeing people who had childhoods and had dreams for their future that were very different from the way they ended up, recognizing our own humanity and one another, that's really the key to kind of addressing the problem.
Thank you so much. We have Father Tim McCabe, the president and CEO of the Pope Francis Center. Once again, thank you so much, Father Tim, for providing your perspective on homelessness and how the Supreme Court allowed cities to ban sleeping outside. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is the Metro on 101.9 WDET. Very insightful words from Father Tim there, recognizing the humanity in others. So important when understanding issues like this. And when we return, we're going to get to another issue, this time that has people around the nation a little bit concerned about the role between religion and public life, the separation of church and state. We're going to hear about the new rule in Louisiana in the Ten Commandments and why people around the nation are concerned when we return.
This is the Metro on 101.9 WDET FM, and we're learning about something that's happening in Louisiana.
That's right. This month, the Louisiana legislature mandated that the Ten Commandments be displayed in all public school classrooms. It's also accompanied by things happening in Oklahoma, where the Bible is now required to be taught to students in the 5th grade and up. But in terms of the Ten Commandments, teaching it and displaying it might not be as straightforward as it sounds. NPR's Jason DeRose has the story.
At Hebrew Union College in Los Angeles, Christine Henriksen-Garraway is taking me on a tour.
This is our atrium. It is a historical part of the building.
She's a professor of Bible at the Rabbinical Seminary.
And one of the art installations we have is a giant statue of Moses, and it's trying to capture the moment when he goes down and sees the golden calf and gets so angry that he smashes the first set of the tablets.
The tablets representing the Ten Commandments. For Jews, Garraway says the Ten Commandments listed in both the biblical books of Exodus and Deuteronomy are just the beginning.
That's a stand-in for the entire Torah, for the entire revelation and covenant that was given to the Jewish people.
A covenant that includes 613 laws about which Garraway says ancient rabbis loved to argue.
The one they really hone in on is Shabbat. So the commandment to keep the Shabbat versus the commandment to remember the Shabbat. And the different wording appears in Exodus and Deuteronomy.
It's a tradition of conversation that makes room for multiple understandings, but it's evangelical Christians who are the main proponents of posting the Ten Commandments in Louisiana classrooms and teaching the Bible in Oklahoma. Professor Kwan-Jin Lee teaches Bible at Fuller Seminary, an evangelical school in Pasadena. She says knowing the Ten Commandments is crucial.
It is a very important part of a covenantal relationship, which is about how you relate with divinity vertically and how you relate with your fellow human beings horizontally.
Meaning the first 5, including no graven images and not taking the Lord's name in vain, are about God.
God has delivered you from slavery in Egypt, and He has walked with you all this time. You are going to become a nation. You're going to have an identity.
And the second 5 are about people's relationships to each other. Don't lie, don't covet.
There are these basic guidelines, and they will teach you how you can make major decisions in terms of the basic ethics.
Necessary, says Lee, in any society. But they're not meant to be understood out of context, says Marvin Sweeney. He teaches Hebrew Bible at Claremont School of Theology in Los Angeles, a Methodist seminary. He says the commandments aren't even easy to count.
When you look at the 10 commandments, there are more than 10. The different traditions number them differently. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different orders of the 10 commandments.
For example,
in Judaism, I am the Lord your God is the first commandment. And in the Roman Catholic Church, that is part of the first commandment, which includes what Judaism numbers as the second commandment, thou shalt have no other gods before me.
And Sweeney says specific translations are laden with interpretation.
Thou shalt not murder is sometimes rendered as thou shalt not kill. The Hebrew lo tirtzach means specifically murder.
Louisiana mandates the word kill. In fact, the wording of the Ten Commandments specified in the law isn't a direct quote from either Exodus or Deuteronomy. It's heavily edited lines from the 17th century King James Version. Hebrew Union College professor Christine Henriksen-Garraway has this reaction to plucking highly altered biblical verses out of context and posting them anywhere.
As a scholar of the ancient world, this drives me nuts.
Because not providing a fuller context and playing fast and loose with the text itself dishonors the very tradition from which the commandments come. Jason DeRose, NPR News, Los Angeles.
That's NPR's Jason DeRose discussing the complications and difficulties of teaching the Ten Commandments in terms of mandating it for public schools, as we just learned the Louisiana legislature did this month. It's the Metro here on 101.9 WDET, hanging out with you together, but we're also going to get into another area of education, this time when it comes to reading.
Indeed. Reading is fundamental. Growing up with shows like Reading Rainbow or Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, reading was encouraged in a big way. Heck, I even remember learning the Dewey Decimal System. But we've seen libraries closing and more students struggling to read or simply lack access to books. Recently, a local nonprofit received a grant, allowing the dispersal of 60,000 books in Detroit. 313 Reads will distribute the books to over 75 local groups to promote reading at home with kids and families. Joining the show now to chat more about the book giveaway is Dr. Leah Van Bell. Dr. Van Bell is the executive director of 313 Reads. Van Bell is a Detroiter and first-generation high school and college graduate. Dr. Van Bell, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you so much. Grateful to be here.
As a Detroiter, what part, what side are you living on?
East Side.
East Side.
That's right.
I'm a new East Sider myself, and it's been a pleasure learning a different side of the city. So
absolutely.
Yeah. So what is 313 Reads and how did it come to be?
Yeah. So 313 Reads, we are a coalition. So we are more than 100 different organizations coming together saying we're all doing our part. We're all working with great love and passion in the work. But when we come together as a coalition, we can have even greater collective impact. So I always use #BetterTogether because it's true, right? So it's that idea that when we have aligned, coordinated efforts, that it's just good all around for babies and families and community.
And Leah, every time I'm speaking with someone, whether it's Alice Hartman from Birdie's Books, or whether I'm chatting with you right now, teachers, former educators. So you all have a unique perspective on reading and literacy. Can you go into that a little bit more?
Yeah. So my former life, I was a professor of literacy education, most recently at Wayne State. Loved that. But what I was seeing more and more, and especially after I became a mama, was that teachers are working really hard every day in our schools, but teachers can't do it all. And we have to support community and family literacy. Like, we all have to be, pulling together. And so my heart was called more and more to do community-based literacy work. And that's why I came to 313 Reads.
And what did you learn, especially as a literacy coach? What were some of the things that you were learning that you were saying, you know what, I think we should do this in a more communal approach?
Yeah, so I think some folks don't realize that as many assets as we have in our community and as brilliant as our children are, that folks talk about a literacy achievement gap. First of all, it is not an achievement gap. It is an access, equity, justice gap, right? And literacy is a civil right, a human right. But do our schools have what they need? Do our families have what they need? Like, I love that you mentioned, Tia, about the closing of some of our public libraries. And I don't think folks realize that fewer than 40% of families living in poverty have any books at home. So we have 60% of our babies who don't have books at home, right? And 1 in 10 children has a school librarian and a school library. So my son goes to school here in Detroit. No school library, no librarian. And if we want our babies to read, well, books are at the heart of that, right? Like, we have to have books for book joy, for learning, for family literacy. And I think what folks often don't realize is we're sitting at about 12% third grade reading in our largest district. So 12% of our babies at third grade are reading at grade level, which predicts a whole lot of life outcomes. Again, it's not because our babies aren't brilliant and our families don't care and our teachers don't care. It's about, we need to grow book access and we need to support community literacy. And that's what this project is trying to do. So with partners like Birdie's Bookmobile, Detroit Parent Network, Detroit Public Library, Focus Hope, Unite Away, all these partners coming together and saying, hey, we need books. And so how can we bring these in together and get them out across the community?
And I had that quote there that you actually put out. It was perfect. I love that you put that in there. So what does it mean for students when they don't have access to a librarian? Honestly, just the librarian alone.
Yeah, so there is this power in someone who knows children's literature and knows this little human, right? And can say, hey, I know you like sharks, or I know you like whatever topic. Let me get this book in your hands. Because think about us as adults. I love to read, but I also want to read about things I'm interested in, right? So there's this power in them being able to connect little humans with a good fit book. Like, that's really powerful.
Yeah. So right now we're chatting with Dr. Leah Van Bell, the executive director of 313 Reads, about a 60,000 book giveaway. So how did the grant come to be? How did you apply for it?
Yeah. So it originally came to Detroit through Grace Community Church. And again, the power of the coalition. And they said, hey, there's this opportunity with the Molina Foundation and Children's Literacy Project to bring over $1 million in new books to Detroit. Yes, we want to do it. So we took it to our coalition and said, hey, let's mobilize this. So together we came up with the process for folks to apply, to get these books. And what's really cool is there's been a work group that's been meeting for a couple months to plan out, okay, what does this look like when they come in and how do we get them out? So it really is, we roll up sleeves together. And it's been really exciting, the shared commitment. And some of the organizations receiving the books, some are schools, some are public libraries. We have nonprofit tutoring organizations like Brilliant Detroit, like Center for Success Network. We also have public libraries, churches, right? Spaces like the Brightmoor Alliance. Mm-hmm. So, and the health system, like Henry Ford Health System, is getting books because it's really this way of saying we all care about literacy. We're all coming together around this.
And once again, you bring up all of the different groups that you all are working with. Brilliant Detroit, I know, actively works with the tiny library, little libraries, and they have those scattered across the east side city of Detroit. But this is, once again, an amazing opportunity for people to collect books for young people. So just thinking, of course, we talked a little bit earlier about reading among neurodivergent, mm-hmm. and just the importance of also having access to books in that way as well. So if you can go into that a little bit more, we can definitely do that.
I love it, yeah. So I'm the mama of a neurodiverse little human, Langston, and it is really important for our children to see themselves represented in books with love, right? So if I think about my own little human, he needs to see children who are Black, who are biracial, who are also neurodivergent. And I love that Langston, as a fourth grader, said, Mom, I want more books about Black kids who are neurodivergent like me. Yes, exactly, right? So, and I know that my friend and colleague Elise Hartman was on the show a little while ago and talked about books as windows and mirrors and sliding glass doors and prisms, right? So we need to see our identities affirmed in really loving ways in books, and that's really critical.
And I know the book giveaway is July 12th.
Yeah, so the book giveaway, we are still looking for volunteers, so I want to put that call out there. Folks can sign up through the United Way for Southeastern Michigan volunteer portal. They've been so kind in providing that in-kind support. And the books are coming July 9th to Focus Hope. They are a host organization, and we'll be sorting the books out by age ranges so organizations can come in and shop their books, so to speak, and box them up and get them out into the hearts and hands of readers.
I love it. Dr. Leah Van Bell is the executive director of 313 Reads. Books will begin heading out next week. Thank you so much. And if you are interested in becoming a volunteer, what's the website again?
www.313reads.org.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Yes, it's the Metro on 101.9 WDET, and we're going to stay with that theme of reading, stay with the theme of libraries. In fact, the introduction of the Black Art Library. Are you familiar with it? It's getting a permanent location. We'll learn more about that with the founder when we return.
It's the Metro on 101.9 WDET FM. Quick weather check today. Partly cloudy with temperatures reaching 80 degrees. Tomorrow, hump day. Expect the heat up. 87 degrees, 4th of July, another 87-degree day. So be prepared with sunscreen and tank tops for 4th of July.
That's right. And books.
And books.
Right. Reading is so important. That's what we've heard about today. And the Black Art Library, which is a project founded by Asma Walton in 2020, where she began posting on Instagram in hopes of making Black art and culture accessible to the public. Well, recently, it's been given a permanent location at the Shepherd. The Shepherd is a cultural arts center in the East Village that has recently opened its doors to provide a space for the community to engage with art and literature. The library is a curation of publications, exhibition catalogs, and theoretical texts about Black art and culture. Walton has a master's in arts politics and an undergrad in art education, where she has used her education to further and educate and support others. To learn more about the move and what you need to know, we are joined by Asma today. Asma, thanks for joining us on the Metro.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so before we get into this move, before we get into this news, I just want to learn a little bit more. I want listeners to learn more about the Black Art Library. I can say it, but I want to hear it from you. What really led you to even making this in the first place?
So I went to Michigan State University,
Go Green.
And I eventually figured out that I was kind of interested in art education, so I went through with the major, did the program, and at the end, I decided I didn't want to get my teaching certification because I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I wanted to do something more community-centered. I didn't really know what that looked like. That's why I just went straight and got my master's, and I was like, I'll figure it out. In that time, I got kind of interested in museums, so I tried that out for a little bit. Then the pandemic happened, and I kind of pivoted while I was at a fellowship at the St. Louis Art Museum. I started Black Art Library just as a project. I wanted to create a resource that could help other people learn about Black art because I felt like I had to do a lot of my own kind of research and searching outside of academia, outside of the universities I attended. So I was like, I want to make it a little easier for other people. I wanted to take out the hard part. I was like, well, if I can find all the information put it in one spot and then make it accessible that way. So that was how my idea came about. So I thought about art books, and I thought that would be a cool way to do it. I love looking at art books. I think they're a cool way to kind of learn about an artist or an exhibition. It's kind of, you got a section with pictures, you got a section that might have one essay. You don't really have to read an art book from cover to cover. You can kind of jump in and kind of see some cool stuff. So I thought that would be a cool way to, get other people interested. So I was like, I'll just start collecting art books and I'll figure out the rest later. I didn't really know what I was going to do with the books.
Yeah, and it seems like that's been working. Before we get into this move, the permanent location, I'm fascinated by this idea of just having a non-permanent library. That seems like a struggle to me, especially in digital spaces. What does that even look like? I mean, what was it like for you to try to maintain that? How do people interact with the literature?
So my first thought was, and this was also after we were in lockdown. So I was like, well, okay, so maybe digitally. So for one, the Instagram account was really important because that's how I was connecting with people. But in my mind, I was like, well, I can mail people the books and then they can mail them back to me. Right? And but then I was like, wait a minute, what if they don't send the books back? And I was like, how am I going to afford to just pay to ship books? And it was like, no, that's probably not it. So I just was like, well, whatever. So when I moved back to Detroit in 2020, August 2020, an artist, Tony Rave, who's based here, he reached out to me and was like, I have this house, it's in Highland Park. I want to renovate it and use it for a space for artists. But right now there's nothing in it. Would you like to bring your books here and we could do a pop-up for a few days? And I was like, oh, that sounds like that would be a cool idea. So that's really how it came about, doing a pop-up and kind of it being mobile. And after that weekend, I got an opportunity to exhibit at the Museum of Contemporary Art Detroit. And after that, it just kind of kept going to different places. I kept getting different inquiries. And it was just exciting to take it from place to place to let different communities engage.
Clearly a demand for this, which I love. Now you're at the Shepherd in East Village. Can you tell us about this location as well as what people will find there?
So this location actually is special because it's its own thing. So when I was approached by the Curiouses about this project, I kind of threw out there that I could curate something actually specific for this space. So that's how the Little Village Library came about. So one part of it is reflective of Black Art Library's collection. So about 200 of the books in it are also in Black Art Libraries. So that's kind of a branch of Black Art Library within it. And the rest of the collection includes publications from a lot of different Michigan museums and institutions, artists that maybe lived in Michigan or had some kind of, maybe went to school in Michigan. And the other books are just kind of more wide on art history. There are some books in there on techniques, on how to draw. It's kind of just a wide variety of art texts, a lot of architectural and design books in there. But I wanted to provide a nice array for the community to be able to kind of look through and learn from.
Yeah, I appreciate you doing the legwork on this. We got about 30 seconds left, but I've got to believe in you diving into the archives. You found something that even blew your mind or some interesting things, information there from the material. Can you tell us what's an interesting thing you learned from this collection?
So I actually have a really cool book that I found, and it is a book about the People Mover stations and the art that is in the different stations. And when I actually physically got the book and was looking through it, I actually saw on the back that it was a Charles McGee photo of him working on the mural that he has within the station. And I just thought that was super cool, especially with the connection to Charles McGee and the Shepherd and the Little Village area. So it was just really cool to see that. So that's one that I'm really excited for people to see in the collection.
And people can find that out. What's the best way for them to get more information about it?
You can follow Black Art Library's Instagram. I have a website in the works, but the Instagram account right now is how you can find out everything that's coming up.
All right. Well, Asma Walton, the Black Art Library curator, new location at the Shepherd. Thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
Thank you.
That's The Metro for Tuesday, July 2nd. You can listen to recent episodes online at WDET.org. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.
The show is produced by Sam Corey, David Lyons, and Jack Philbrandt. Additional production support from Anel Scott and Sydney Walkley. Our engineer is Nate Bender, and the music is by Sam Bobian and Will Sessions.
The Metro is a production of WDET, a listener-supported service of Wayne State University. If you like what you hear and want to support The Metro, consider becoming a member at WDET.org/donate.
This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you again tomorrow.
WDET is supported by the College of Business Administration at University of Detroit Mercy. UDM is offering a new master's degree in ethical leadership focused on sustainable, ethical, and inclusive problem solving. More information at business.udmercy.edu.